Welcome to the next installment of our Meforshim series here at Kesher. As you know, we're working our way through 8 outstanding personalities whose life and legacy continues to reverberate through the ages. And last week we did Rihal Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, and we're going from one Yehuda to another Yehuda. We're doing tonight Yehuda Hechasid, and we shall see that they lived in broadly similar times, but they lived in different cultural milieus, and their contributions to Jewish history is certainly distinct one from the other. As in the past, it's an honor to dedicate this year tonight to the memory of David's parents, Mordechai ben Harav Menachem Mendel and Liba Bas Abba, as well as his late father-in-law Shmuel ben David, Aleichem Shalom. Our subject for tonight, Rabbi Yehuda Hassidim, is not the subject of nearly as much historical evidence as in the case of Yehuda Halevi. I don't mean to belabor the comparison, but when I began to research him for the preparation for tonight, I looked in some of my usual sort of sources which provide information about historical personalities. And in particular, I looked at the Encyclopedia Judaica. Yehuda Halevi, there were about 5 or 6 pages. For Yehuda Hassidim, about 1.5 columns. So a fraction of the amount. And that's primarily because we don't have nearly as much documentary evidence about him. There may also be a bias on the part of the Jewish historiographers towards the Sephardic authorities who were much more acculturated and who cultivated intellectual pursuits, like we spoke about lexicography and philology, grammar, astronomy, philosophy, and that sort of thing. Yehuda HaChassid lived in a completely different cultural milieu, and his interest and his contribution were completely contrasting or distinct from that of Yehuda Halevi. Okay, I'll try not to belabor the comparison anymore, which is more or less artificial. Truthfully, it's just we did Yehuda last week, we're doing Yehuda this week. But let's consider now the evidence and what we can learn about Yehuda HaChassid. As we shall discover, his influence is profound. So he's known as Rabbi Yehuda Hechasid, the pious or the saint. The Chassid is a saint. His father was known as Rabbi Shmuel Hechasid. His father is not nearly as well known as the son. But the father was maybe the first of the so-called Chassidei Ashkenaz, and we learn a lot more about them and who they were. The family was descended from like the first family of Ashkenazic Jewry. These are called the Colonymides. There was a man called Colonymus, which is probably, well, it definitely is a Greek name. Our Greek expert, Yaakov Chaliotis, is not here with us tonight, but it means Shem Tov. The name Shem Tov, the Hebrew name Shem Tov, is a translation of Colonymus. Colonymus is one of those Greek names which have become popular Hebrew names, although maybe not as common as some other names you may come across. The name Kalman is probably like a diminutive of Colonymus. They sometimes go together, Colonymus, Kalman. In any case, this was a family of scholars, even in Bavel. The family was found in Italy and moved from Italy, migrated from Italy to Germany, to Ashkenaz in the 9th century. And Yehuda HaChassid, his father Shmuel HaChassid, were descendants of this family. They were great scholars. According to tradition or legend, they cultivated and retained Kabbalistic, mystical secrets, which were contained in documents that were sort of secretly passed from father to son. And Shmuel HaChassid had those teachings, and he transmitted them to his son, Yehuda HaChassid. The main book for which he is known, I wonder if anybody is familiar with it. You could possibly guess the name even if you haven't heard of it. It's called Sefer Hasidim. Sefer Hasidim. Now we shall distinguish between the Hasidim that we're talking about in our discussion tonight and the much better known Hasidim, the followers of the Baal Shem Tov. Much more recently, the Baal Shem Tov was from, Miguel, take a handout. The Baal Shem Tov was born in 1698 or maybe 1700 in Poland, and of course those are the, so to speak, contemporary Hasidim. We're talking tonight though about the Hasidei Ashkenaz. So I think it's important, before we make use of the handout that you have in front of you, to provide some background in terms of the milieu and the context. Ashkenaz, particularly in the wake of the Crusades, you see on the page in front of you, in your hands, that he was born, Yehuda Hasid was born in 1150. His father, Shmuel HaChasid, was born around 1120, lived around 1175. This was a time, unfortunately, of intense persecution. In the wake of the First Crusades in 1096, for the subsequent couple of centuries, Jewish life in Ashkenaz was unstable, was characterized by Christian persecution, religious repression. It was a time of intense anti-Jewish animus, courtesy of the Catholic Church, which held sway over the European lands. In contrast to the Sephardic lands that we were learning about in the person of Yehuda Halevi and Ibn Ezra, where we said it was relatively enlightened, there was a relative period of let's say, tolerance and even cooperation and even integration. All of that was completely different in the Ashkenazic lands. I'm talking about France and Germany, the Rhineland in particular. From the crown, there was unrelenting economic exploitation and humiliation, and the Jews were caught between the two. The hatred of the church, the exploitation of the state. To a certain degree, they were able to play off one against the other, actually, but the Jews were always living on the margins of society, always at the whim of the local duke or the local potentate, and frequently trying to deflect the continuous agitation of the church, of the local Catholic authorities, to massacre them, force conversions, drive them out, or whatever it may be. And as we said, this is a great contrast with Sfarad, which under the Muslims was much more tolerant. Although the party was already coming to an end for them as well, with the Almohades, we spoke about them last week, in 1149, religious wars and that sort of thing. So it was a time, wherever one turns in Europe, for a Jew, difficult milieu in which to live. Catholicism is or was an austere, severe religion, an emphasis on faith for salvation, otherwise eternal damnation. So the stakes were high, and as we said, the Jews were under continuous pressure and continuous threats of forced conversion and the like. And yet, and this is an irony which is sometimes lost on secular historians of Jewish history, Jewish life at that time in Ashkenaz was very vibrant, very creative. It was a time of great creativity, a time of great intellectual verve. It was a time when religious life was vibrant and intense, great study, great scholarship, great creativity, particularly in the study of the Talmud and Halakha. Unlike Spain and the Arab lands, there was little poetry or philosophy or philology, even parshanut, like Torah interpretation, and certainly study of the Nevi'im, was relatively, I wouldn't use the word neglected, it didn't have the same emphasis. It wasn't the same arena for intellectual study and creativity. They wrote some piyutim, but was never elevated to the high art of the Sephardic poets. In fact, Chaim Soloveitchik, that's the only son of the late Rav Yashaber Soloveitchik, the famous Rabbi Soloveitchik from Boston. He made a comment. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the context, but he commented in one of his articles that Rashi also dabbled in piyutim, but they add no luster to his name. It was considered to be like an activity. Any great scholar should be able to write a few piyutim. So he picked up a pen and wrote some, but they were not of the stature or the standard of his other contributions. Jewish life in Ashkenaz was inner-directed, relatively limited interaction with the outside world. Nevertheless, some interaction was inevitable because the Jews were living as a small, embattled minority within the Christian context, which led the Tosafists. You remember the Balei Tosafot were the mostly grandchildren and other descendants of Rashi. They were the leading Balei Tosafot, the leading rabbinic figures at that time. And they developed a doctrine of accommodation to living among Gentiles, even though they regarded them, meaning the Christians, as more or less idolaters. It was a time of developing brilliant, ingenious Talmudic analysis, which was a new style, it was a new approach, it was a new, profound, analytic approach to the Talmud, and reflects the intense focus and intense intellectual energy that was invested in the study of Talmud, and to a very great extent, the teachings of the later halachic authorities are built on those discoveries and those innovations of the Balei Tosafot. So it was a time where it's described or imagined by many secular Jewish historians as a kind of dark age, but not to go around, hopefully. I know you don't mind doubling up, but if you've got enough. It was not a dark age in Jewish terms. Again, in terms of freedom, in terms of acculturation, it was very limited. But in terms of the vitality and the creativity of Jewish life, there was a lot happening then. The interesting thing is, though, that maybe inevitably, certainly in historical retrospect, we can see the natural pushback against all of that intense study of Talmud. And again, it was partly because the Christians were condemning the Jews, were persecuting them, were marginalizing them. It's almost as if there was no opportunity and certainly no attraction for the Jews in the wider cultural, intellectual currents, and therefore we focused very intensely on what is ours, the Torah, the Talmud, Jewish law, Jewish practice, Jewish prayer, Jewish study. But the pushback was that all of this brilliant, ingenious, intense, focused Talmudic analysis is a little bit rigid, it's a little bit technical, it's a little bit academic, it's a little bit cerebral for those who get satisfaction in it, okay. But there were some who were looking for more. And Rabbi Yehuda Hechasid exemplifies, he was known as what he is recalled as the greatest or the leader of the Hasidei Ashkenaz. They asked, is God getting lost in all the scholarship and erudition? Halacha is essential, but it is technical and rigid. Where is the spirituality and the mystery, the miraculous and the metaphysical? This was the area, the endeavor of the Hasidei Ashkenaz. Now, they were called Hasidim because to be a Chassid is to go beyond the requirement of the law. A Chassid is a saint who goes beyond what the halacha demands because they didn't find sufficient satisfaction or sufficient fulfillment, or they did not regard the halacha itself as a sufficient means of getting close to God. Not that they were denigrating the halakha, but they felt there has to be more. And therefore, they encouraged a chassid to go beyond what the halakha requires in every area. Amen. So this was an elitist, not a popularist movement. The later Hasidim, the Hasidim who were the followers of the Baal Shem Tov, and maybe on another occasion entirely we can discuss that, of course that was a popularist movement, a movement that appealed to the common man, a movement that taught of the worthiness and the preciousness and the beloved status of even a Jew, even a simple Jew, even an ignorant Jew in the eyes of Hashem. That was the Hasidim of the Polish Hasidim of the 18th century. The Hasidei Ashkenaz were for the elite. They said, look, if you're a common man, maybe that's all you can do. All you can do is keep the halacha. But if you want to go beyond that, then if you want to be, so to speak, the one who seeks to deepen his relationship with Hashem, the halacha is only the sort of context for your true religious expression.
I thought that the Hassidim were only those who were part of a Hasidic group who followed a Rebbe.
That's the concept. Those are the Hasidim of the Baal Shem Tov. That's what I'm saying. We're talking about the Hasidim Ashkenaz, a complete group. That's right. 300 years before, 400 years before, or 500 years before, actually. Yeah.
I think there were any others who were called
Well,
Hasidim.
okay. Well, now you know. That's why you come to this year. If you knew it all, you wouldn't have to come here. So it was an elitist, not a popularist movement. We said that his father was called Rabbi Shmuel Hechasid. He was also known as Hanavi, also Hakadosh, and his father, I'm talking about, represented the rabbinic royalty of Ashkenazic Jewry, and he had a beis medrash in Shpira, in Speyer. And Yehuda Chassid, before he became known by that, sobriquet, until the age of 18, according to legend, and there's no documentary evidence to substantiate this, according to legend, till the age of 18, he was not much into learning. He was cultivating the art of archery, and then some kind of experience befell him, it's not quite clear what, and he had a reawakening, a religious reawakening. And he came into the beis medrash, and his father would maybe, I don't want to say despaired, but possibly was distressed that his son was taking up all kinds of wayward interests. But then he became a devoted disciple of his father, and ultimately he achieved great learning, great erudition. And it's interesting to note that Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid, his halachic rulings are cited in a number of places, a number of responsa. It's apparent that he was a profound Talmudist, but he didn't emphasize it. As I say, he was looking for more of a spiritual area, of spiritual arena. There's an interesting irony here, and I'm not just sort of artificially linking him with people we've spoken about previously in our series. And it's ironic that the Hasidic Ashkenaz, who were very, so to speak, frum, they were not into the acculturation and not into the engagement with the wider society, just the opposite for the reason that we've explained. And yet, they were influenced by the Ibn Ezra and by Sadia Gaon, although the Hebrew versions of Sadia Gaon's writings that were circulating then were not as thorough as the translations by Ibn Tibbon later. They were more like simplistic, maybe a bit poetic, and they were stripped of the more philosophical aspects. So it was more the theology of Sadia Gaon that was accessible to them rather than the philosophy. But the interesting thing is Ibn Ezra also, his independence of thought appealed to them while showing deference to tradition in practical matters. And it's interesting and ironic that Yehuda HaChassid, who in a way is like the quintessential traditionalist, he frequently demands greater devotion, greater piety than the halacha and the Talmud itself would stipulate. And we'll soon see some examples where he even promotes or even insists upon certain requirements which are not found anywhere in the Talmud. And the fascinating thing is that many of them, as we shall see, are actually parts of contemporary Jewish life. Some of them are cited in Shulchan Aruch, some of them are not cited in Shulchan Aruch, and yet are adduced by subsequent poskim, some of which you're probably familiar with, maybe some that you're not.
Where do these requirements come from?
They come from these books. Well, they're found in Sefer Hasidim. Where they come from? Come from the world of Kabbalah, the world of mysticism, which we'll look at that more closely, in a short while. This is the Sefer Hasidim. We'll talk more about it very soon. But I'm just wanting to give you, by way of background, he also wrote a commentary on the Torah. It was written really by his son. He had a son called Moshe Zaltman, I think he was known as. His son Moshe Zaltman. And he published his father's commentary on the Torah. It was in manuscript for 700 years. It was published for the first time in 1975. You can think of this as, I think, a fascinating little footnote. Perush HaTorah.
It was only printed 40 years ago.
That's right. That's right. It was printed in 1975. But you may soon learn why it was in manuscript only for so long. So it wasn't exactly written by Yehuda Hassidim, but it was his teachings written by his son. And there are a lot of statements in that commentary which are actually quite shocking. He adheres closely to the Pshat generally, but he comes up with some ideas which are a great surprise, and we can see, or many have seen, the influence here of Ibn Ezra, the independence of thought of Ibn Ezra. And there are some passages there which seem to border on the heretical. And he mentions, for example, that the Song of the Well, Ali Be'er Enula, it's in Bamidbar, chapter 21, verses 17 and 18. It's a very short song. Most of the songs that we encounter in the Torah are substantial, like the Song of the Sea, or other songs, the Song of Moshe, Ha'azinu Hashemayim Ba'ada Beira, and other songs that we find in the Tanakh. This is a very short one. It's all of 2 verses. So he has a radical suggestion about why it's so short. I don't want to maybe dwell on that too much, but he says that really it was longer, but David HaMelech took it and he incorporated it into Tehillim, and they just left those 2 psukim in the Torah. This is a radical idea. It's so radical that when it was published in 1975, somebody brought it to the attention of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, and when he read it, he said, this is heresy. This must be a rank of forgery. It's not possible that the great and holy, pious Rabbi Yehuda Chassid could have written such a thing. And he declared that one is not allowed to publish it or read it or keep that book. You've got to suppress it. And actually, a censored version of that commentary was subsequently published. It's not only that passage, there are a number of passages. Now, much literature has, in recent years, grown up around that as to whether it really was a forgery, whether it really was genuine. It seems that very likely...
700 years.
Yeah, that's it.
How is it?
Yeah, how it could be preserved. Yeah, but the truth is that we do find citations from other Rishonim of the writings of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid al HaTorah, which are in that manuscript. And not only that, but there's an important subsequent commentator, actually a Kabbalist and also a Halachist, who does cite the same comment in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. So it's difficult to accept, and most scholars do not accept the suggestion that it's a forgery or that sort of thing. So it's a fascinating little, as I say, a footnote. So this reflects the independence of thought, really, of Ibn Ezra, because Ibn Ezra seems to say some similar ideas as well. And a close analysis of this commentary of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, the sort of shocking things that he comes out with, many of them apparently are foreshadowed by Ibn Ezra, but just Ibn Ezra wrote them in a more oblique way. If you remember, we discussed how he writes in a kind of elusive way. He doesn't quite spell out what he means, and he leaves a little bit sort of open to interpretation. Yehuda Chassid, though, seems to follow up on that. Now, the classic source to know more about the Hasidic Ashkenaz is an article written by Chaim Soloveitchik called 3 Themes on Sefer Hasidim. I mentioned Chaim Soloveitchik as a professor of Jewish studies. He is the only son of the late Rabbi Yoshe Ber Soloveitchik. He's a gifted, first-rate scholar, but inevitably forever in the shadow of his father. This article was published in 1976, and it is known to any serious student of medieval Jewish history. And I was pleased to find it in my archives from when I was in graduate school from 35 years ago, and when I was preparing for the Shir tonight. So here it is, this article, and I will pass it around because not that much has been written on the subject, and this is the classic work. Many other articles have been written, but as I say, anyone who claims familiarity with the historiography of medieval Jewish history will be familiar with this article by Chaim Soloveitchik. It's interesting. He writes in the article, he makes a comment that he wrote this article in 1967. But he's such a perfectionist, or 1966, it took him 10 years before he actually submitted it for publication. And he is a perfectionist, Chaim Soloveitchik. Anyway, it's a very influential article. The point is that Chaim Soloveitchik develops or articulates some of the novel ideas of Sefer Hasidim. And one of them is a pasuk in Iyov, Lo matzanuha sagi koach. We have not found the Torah to be sufficiently powerful. What is the meaning? He says that the Torah does not fully express the divine will, nor does it fulfill the needs of man. He doesn't mean to say the Torah is inadequate. What he means is that what Hashem really wants of a Jew, it goes far beyond the simple, limited dictates of the Torah. That is just sort of the baseline. But a person who seeks closeness to God, of course he must go beyond, and he desires to go beyond the limited requirements of the Torah, by which he includes the Talmud as well. One has to go beyond that. To expand the duties of man, he wants absolute honesty, humility, total mastery over his Yetzer Hara, no indulgence. The hallmark of the Jew is unshakable faith. And one finds in the Sefer Hasidim, which I'll tell you a little bit more about it. I mean, we've spoken about it already. We'll soon see the nature of that book. The strength to stand up to unimaginable pressure, up to and including the most gruesome martyrdom, which, as we said, was a sad but characteristic feature of Jewish life in Ashkenaz during those generations. So this emphasis on absolute faith, unshakable faith, and that sort of profound conviction was part of what gave the Jews of Ashkenaz the strength, as I say, to rebuff the pressure of the most gruesome kind to which they were subject by the Christian Church. So this is important context for the writings of the Hassidic Ashkenaz, who were very influential. Now, they were included among the Balei Tosafot. Yehuda Hassidim, Shmuel HaChassid is quoted in Tosfos in a few places. And I have a special fondness for Shmuel HaChassid, the father of Yehuda Hassidim, because many years ago, when I was in graduate school, I wrote a dissertation on a commentary, actually 3 commentaries, on Divrei Hayamim. And one of the commentaries on Divrei Hayamim is that commentary attributed to Rashi. I mentioned it in passant when we spoke about Rashi, because I said Rashi wrote on all of the Talmud nearly and all of the Tanakh nearly. Well, part of the nearly is Divrei Hayamim Chronicles. It is apparent, and all the scholars are in agreement, notwithstanding some oversight on the part of some writers, that the commentary attributed to Rashi on Divrei Hayamim is not really written by Rashi. And that was part of my dissertation, to prove how we know that, and to explain why Rashi never wrote on it, and did he really write on it, but it was lost. And of course the tantalizing question, who wrote that commentary? Well, we don't really know who wrote it, but one of the theories that I advanced is it may have been written by Shmuel HaChassid, the father of Yehuda Chassid, because he writes in one place about the doctrine of Meis Mitzvah. Meis Mitzvah is a Talmudic principle. Literally, it refers to a corpse which is found in a abandoned space, and there is no one around to bury that person. And his next of kin either don't know, or don't exist, or don't care. And a person who comes across a body in the field, because if it's in the city, maybe he can call the Chevra Kadisha, but if it's in an abandoned place, he has responsibility to bury it, and it takes precedence over nearly every other mitzvah that there may be. And he should bury it in that very place, etc. So he says this idea of Meis Mitzvah should be applied to other mitzvot as well. If you see that there is a mitzvah which is neglected, so you should be an advocate of that mitzvah. If the people in your town are studying Nashim and Nezikim, so you should study Kodshim. If the people in your town are exacting in certain areas but neglectful of a particular mitzvah, you should take up that mitzvah, you should advocate for that mitzvah. So Divrei Hayamim is a neglected book. For certain reasons, of all the books of Tanakh, it's probably the least studied, for certain reasons. And it could well be that Shmuel HaChassid was practicing what he preaches, and because people weren't studying it, and there were very few commentaries, probably no commentaries on it at that time, so he undertook to write the commentary. That's only speculation, but there's some reason to think that may be the case. So this is Shmuel Hechasid, the father of Yehuda Hechasid. Now let me tell you a bit more about this quirky book, Sefer Hasidim, a very popular book as well. It is one of the most popular Musar texts. It is different than the more philosophical or more conceptual books like Mesilas Yesharim or Ochas Sadikim or even Chovos Halevavos. It's full of folk tales, of stories, of illustrations, of down to earth kind of examples. In this sense, it's a very valuable historical resource for those who are interested in understanding Jewish life in medieval Ashkenaz, because he relates so many examples, real life examples. Some of them may be a bit fanciful, but it makes fascinating reading. And actually, I took it off my shelf for the first time in many years, and I realized, I don't even remember when it was, at one time I obviously started to read this from cover to cover, because the first probably 50 pages are annotated, and I realized that actually I started learning it, so it shows how poor my memory is that I couldn't even quite remember that part of it. But in addition to the examples of faith and examples of, there's a lot of superstition here as well about dreams and about miracles and about demons and that sort of thing. The introduction, I don't mean the author's introduction, but the introductory section is called Tzavaos Rabbi Yehuda Hechasid. Tzavas, the ethical will of Rabbi Yehuda Hechasid. And there you have a large number of prescriptions, some of which we're going to look at closely. So with that extended introduction, which has taken up half of our time, let's now take a look at the page you have in front of you and use it as a basis to consider more closely the life of Yehuda Hechasid. So he was born in Speyer around 1150. He died in Regensburg in Germany as well in 1217. Actually, we know the exact date of his death according to tradition, at least the 13th of Adar. There's a slight...
Absolute contemporary of the Rambam.
Yes, that's right. That's right, nearly so, that's right. Was the Rambam lived from 1135 to 1204, so very close to the Rambam. Actually, there's some speculation whether he was familiar with the Rambam. I don't mean personally whether he knew of the writings of the Rambam. He may well have, but he doesn't quote the Rambam, so it's difficult to say for sure.
Very opposite.
Yes, that's true. The Rambam is the rationalist, and he's the mystic. Yeah, very, very. Although you'd be surprised, there's some similarities as well. Interestingly, you might be surprised. So he died on the 13th of Adar, and perhaps I will leave the legend about his death until we get there. He's known as an ethicist and a Kabbalist. His father, we said, was called Rabbi Shua Chassid, led a famous yeshiva in Speyer, instructed him in the Kabbalistic teachings. Although he possessed vast Talmudic knowledge, he emphasized piety and the mystical meaning of prayer and led a life of self-denial and fasting. It's fascinating that Rabbi Yehuda Hechasid is mentioned in the Shulchan Aruch by name, which is uncommon because there are very few personalities mentioned by name in the Shulchan Aruch. Even someone like the Rambam, whose writings are very influential in the Shulchan Aruch, is rarely mentioned by name in the Shulchan Aruch. There's one place where Rabbi Yehuda Hechasid is mentioned by name, and that is where the Shulchan Aruch says about the requirement to eat on Shabbos. One is not allowed to fast on Shabbos. But, he says, if there's a person who fasts so regularly that for him to eat is uncomfortable and to fast is more of an oneg, like Rabbi Yehuda Hechasid, then he's allowed to fast even on Shabbos. And it seems that was his practice. He used to fast every day until night. He wouldn't eat during the day, lahavdil, Ramadan every day. And so much so that on Shabbos he would also fast, because for him to eat during the day was difficult. It was more of an oneg for him to fast. It seems strange to us, but it reflects the kind of like I say, the going beyond the requirement. He wouldn't say that a person is required to fast every day. I don't even think he encouraged his closest followers to do that. But he personally did it. He fasted every day, even on Shabbos. Yeah, he ate at night. He ate at night.
Oh.
He ate at night. He fasted during the day. Yeah.
Yeah, can I just pick up on the issue of what he says, Kabbalist issue?
Yeah.
Clearly, obviously, he predated by some years Moshe Cordovero and Yisro Gloria. So, what elements of Kabbalah?
Okay, that's a very good question. So.
It's very confusing because even the Leon appeared.
Okay, that's right. So you mentioned Cordovero, or Moshe Cordovero, or the Ari. Of course, they lived in the 16th century. But the main basis of the Lurianic, so-called Lurianic Kabbalah, of course, is the Zohar. Now, the Zohar is attributed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was a Tana, but everyone is in agreement that it was not in circulation, it was not in general circulation until Moshe de Leon, who lived in the late 13th century in Spain. So he predated the sort of revelation of the Zohar. But it seems, and this is sometimes overlooked, there was a very well-established, albeit esoteric, Kabbalistic tradition in Ashkenazic circles as well. I said those writings that, according to legend, that his father, Rabbi Shmuel Hechasid, had, that he received from his father. Actually, Shmuel Hechasid was orphaned as a young boy, but those writings were given to a certain sage, and he gave them to Shmuel Hechasid when he grew to maturity. And actually, the Rebbeim of the Ramban in Kabbalah were called Rav Ezra and Rav Azriel. And they were disciples of Rabbi Yitzchak Sagi Nahor, and Rabbi Yitzchak Sagi Nahor was a disciple of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. So, or of maybe the father of. There's a certain. How did it get to him? Yeah. So. Yeah, so it seems it was passed down in the family from this Colonimus, who was the great-great-grandfather, going back a couple of centuries, in the 9th century. And it came from Bavel. So it was literally an esoteric tradition. It wasn't known to the general public because it was deliberately obscured from public attention. Now, because this sort of thing is difficult to verify, difficult to quantify, it is shrouded in mystery. But
we also say that the Rambam didn't know anything about Kabbalah, which is not true. But apparently, Rambam.
Ah, yes.
And at the same time, he ignores it completely, and all the try to point that Kabbalah is nothing because the Rambam makes that, and this is completely contemporary. So it's very, very interesting.
It's true, but remember the Rambam lived in a different cultural milieu, different geographical location as well. And, if the Rambam is devoted to rationalism and to the philosophical tradition of Aristotle, so he's not going to take any interest or give any credence to Kabbalah. Yeah.
So the issue is, my question is really, I get that, is the term, we use the term Kabbalah, and we look at it in our own way. What was he being called in his time a Kabbalist? Or is it just that he had teachings which were set, and we've now attributed the term Kabbalah to...
Yeah, I'm using the term Kabbalah in a sort of generic way. The truth is, the term Kabbalah, the way we use it, wasn't even in use until relatively recently. The Ramban calls it Chen, Liyodei Chen. Chen is Chachma Nisteret, the hidden wisdom. And that was the sort of thing. But as I said, if you read the Sefer Hasidim, even a few passages, you'll see that there clearly is a reliance on mystical teachings and principles that are not articulated in the Talmud, and we'll soon see some examples of that. Let's go a little bit further in the short description here. His pureness of heart and fear of God are evident in his work, Sefer Hasidim, which was highly acclaimed. It covers all aspects of Jewish life, capturing, by the way, highly acclaimed. It was published first in Bologna in 1538. So it was published very early. I mean, the printing press, the first Hebrew book was only published in 1475. What was that? Do you remember?
Rashi.
Very good. Rashi's commentary on the Torah was the first Hebrew book published in Regia de Calibrea. And in 1538, already, not much more than 50 years later, already 60 years later, under 60 years later, Sefer Hassidim was published in Bologna, and it has been reprinted many times. It was reprinted in sort of modern times in 1891 in Berlin, and then it was reprinted in 1957 in Jerusalem by Mosad Rav Kook. This edition that I'm holding here, edited by Rav Reuven Margolius. I bought this in 1983, and it says here, Hotzah Shminit, Tafshin Mem Gimel. 8 printings between 1957 and 1983. It went through 8 printings. I think this is still the standard edition. I'm sure it's been through many, many more printings since then. It's a very excellent edition, and that's why it's remains the standard. But its popularity has endured, and it has a big impact in halachic circles. Again, we'll soon see to what I refer. Let's go a bit further. Capturing the student's attention with parables and anecdotes taken from daily life, he imparts the most profound concepts of ethics, prayer with concentration, philosophical themes such as reward and punishment and divine justice, and laws for day-to-day living such as Shabbat and festival laws. It doesn't have the sophistication of like the philosophical works or even the ethical works that we are familiar with, but it has a simplicity and a kind of cogent style which makes it very impactful. I have here a longer list of some of the range of subjects which are taken up, and you can see why it became a popular, almost a handbook. The book instructs the pious man how to resist temptation and avoid any situation which may lead to sin. It teaches how to dress, to speak, to pray, to work, and to sleep, how to choose a wife and to select friends, how to harmonize between the necessities of existence and the requirements of religious life, which city is suitable for a pious person to live in and which is not, the right relationship between teacher and pupil, how to choose a righteous teacher, in what fields one may have commercial contact with Gentiles and how to treat them, and many other subjects. No other Hebrew work in ethics covers so much ground and devotes such close attention to realistic detail. And remember, this predates the Shulchan Aruch by a few hundred years. It predates the Torah by 200 years. It predates even just about the Mishnah Torah, or it's, let's say, contemporaneous with the Mishnah Torah as well. So its breadth and its accessibility, albeit there's no organization here, it's completely like chaotic. And actually, we don't know for sure if Rabbi Yehuda Chassid wrote the whole thing. It was likely edited by his Talmid, Rabbi Lezer Rokeach, who wrote the famous Sefer Rokeach, and some parts of it were probably written by his father, Shmuel HaChassid, and it's difficult to know exactly who wrote what. It emerged from his, like we say, Beit Midrash, from his circle. Just to read a bit further, the book has remained a favorite classic. Here and there we find in Sefer Hasidim instructions based on Kabbalah rather than Halacha that have gained acceptance, such as the custom to refrain from marrying a woman with the same name as one's mother. I don't know whether you've ever come across that, but it says that a man should not marry a woman who has the same name as his mother, and a woman should not marry a man who has the same name as her father. And you might say, well, such a thing is, only happens maybe once in a generation. It's not so. I mean, maybe to one person only once, but I know of cases like that. Do you know, Miguel, of any such cases?
People, I know that we're talking about a Shida, but then it's a second name, so it's okay.
There's a...
It's fascinating. There are many customs that come from the Tzava that are very popular in Sephardi world.
Yes.
That we don't know where they come from.
Yes.
I mean, I never heard.
Yes.
Not blocking the wall, not.
Okay, we're going to get to that. Correct. We're going to talk about a number of things.
Not to, it's right here. When you walk to the cemetery, not to come back to the same way. You go the other way. All these things.
A lot of things. We'll soon discuss a few more of them as well. Absolutely. The beautiful hymn Shir HaKavod, which we call colloquially Anim Zmiros. So that is attributed to Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. Now, some have questioned it. Tzun says it was written by Yehuda HaChassid. Leopold Tzun, one of the great early modern Jewish historians. Others have questioned that, some attribute it to his father, Rabbi Shmuel Hechasid. It's recited at the conclusion of the services on Shabbos, on Yom Tov, and we open the Aron Kodesh as well. We don't open the Aron Kodesh, very often, normally only to take out the Sefer Torah or for Avinu Malkeinu. On Yomim Noraim, certain times we open it, but here we open it every time we say Shir HaKavod because of its great sanctity. Now it says here at the very end of this paragraph, a number of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid's writings still exist in manuscript form, and the main book that he wrote, which is in manuscript, is this one here. It's now been published recently. It was published in 2005. It's 2 volumes called Sefer Gematriot, the Rabbeinu Yehuda HaChassid, and actually does not belong to me, it belongs to Simcha. Ruthie and I, we bought it for him as a gift for some occasion, and he hasn't taken it to South Africa yet, so I can show it to you. I didn't ask his permission, but I'm sure he'll be happy with it. We're putting it. Yeah, well, actually, he was going to take it with him recently, and they didn't have room for it because he took some other svarim. So fortunately, this one is still here. You're welcome to look through it. It has an extensive notes because it's written in a slightly cryptic manner. It has, like its name implies, gematriot, and a lot of other things. Some astrology is in there as well. Now, the excerpts from his will and testament we're going to get to in a moment, but I want to mention some of his talmidim. And from here you can see, especially those who have some familiarity with the halachic development, some sources and some authorities who are very influential in the development of halacha, especially in the Ashkenazic world, but I can tell you quoted very frequently by the Beis Yosef and definitely incorporated into halachic sort of spectrum in any quarter of Jewish rabbinic endeavor. So I mentioned Rav Elazar Rokeach of Worms. He's called the Sefer Rokeach. He became known as Rokeach. Elazar is the same gematria as Rokeach. Rokeach means the perfumer. Also Rav Yitzchak ben Moshe of Vienna, Yaakov's hometown, nearly. And he wrote a famous book, I hope you've heard of it, called Or Zarua. Or Zarua Lat Tzadik. So this Sefer Or Simcha. Yeah, so he called it. That's right. So he called his book Or Zarua, very influential. So this Rokeach also, these are 2 halachic sources that are, as I keep saying, very influential, cited by many later authorities, and they have a special clout, a special authority, because they are suffused with Kabbalistic ideas as well. They are disciples of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid. Also, someone who you may or may not have heard of, Rav Moshe of Kutzi. And he wrote a book called Sefer Mitzvot Gadol, colloquially known as Smag. Now, if you've never heard of it, it's because it has been eclipsed by the Torah and by the Shulchan Aruch. But if you open any page of Talmud, nearly any page of the Talmud in the entire Shas, and you look at the marginal notes, you will find that the Vilna Talmud is published with footnotes that provide the student with the source in the halachic literature where the passage in the Talmud is quoted. In other words, there may be multiple opinions on the page of the Talmud, and the halacha may follow a particular view. There is in the 17th century, there was a scholar whose name escapes me at this moment, and he alerted the reader as to where a particular passage in the Talmud is found in the halachic literature. And he quotes 3 sources, meaning he alerts the reader as to where to find this Talmudic statement in 3 sources. Do you know what the 3 sources are? 2 of them are clear, the 3rd one I just mentioned, but you've never heard of it before. Or maybe you have. The Rambam says where it's quoted in the Rambam. He'll tell you where it's quoted in the Torah and where it's quoted in the Smag. The Smag is Sefer Mitzvot Gadol, and it's kind of a forerunner of the Torah. It's been in a way superseded by. So Rav Moshe Mikutzi is the author of the Smag. He's a Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid.
Yes, but who says that these 3 sources you need?
If you look in any page in the Talmud, in any page in Shas, so in the upper, in the margin, you'll see the Ein Mishpat and Ner Mitzvah.
Ein Mishpat takes you to this book.
That's right. So that tells you where to find where the Talmudic passage is cited in the Rambam, or in the Torah, or in the Smag. Sometimes all 3. Yeah. So the Smag was a definitive halacha compendium. And again, these are all three Talmud. Now, the truth is that when I looked at it more closely, there are conflicting views as to whether which of these was an actual Talmud or which one was like a Talmud of a Talmud. But they were all definitely like part of the Hasidic Ashkenaz cultural milieu. Some say Maharam Rottenberg, and we'll speak more about Maharam Rottenberg, although he's not among our immediate subjects, but we will mention his name in an important way in due course, not tonight, in the coming weeks. And he also is regarded as the last of the Balei Tosas, and he was also part and influenced by the Hasid Ashkenaz. Some say he was a Talmud of Rabbi Yehuda, but this cannot be, because Rabbi Yehuda died in, what does it say here? 1217. Maharam Rottenberg was born in 1215. So he could not have been a Talmud, and a young one. Yeah. So the sources that say that they're not on top of things. It almost led me astray, but I looked at it more closely, and it can't be. Even though some have mentioned that, he must have been like a Talmud of a Talmud, second generation, so to speak. Let's look at some of the citations in the right-hand column, and then we're going to save the excerpts from the Will and Testament, which is fascinating, for the last. So on the right-hand column, and by the way, in the middle, you just have a facsimile of one of the pages of this volume, this edition of Rav Reuven Margolios. So here's an excerpt. A Jew who hears that people are taking him for a non-Jew, meaning he's has the appearance, he's sort of mistaken for a Christian, he must say, I am a Jew. We learn this from Moses. He said to God, since I do not merit to enter the promised land, let my bones be buried there, just as Joseph's bones are buried in the land of Israel. Said the Holy One, blessed be he who acknowledges his nationality will be buried in his country. Hamode ba'aretz nikbar ba'aretz. Joseph, who declared, for I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, ki ganov ganavti me'eretz ha'ivrim, is buried in the land of Israel. But you remained silent when you heard it said about yourself, an Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. Who said that? Ish mitzri hitzilanu. Who said Ish mitzri hitzilanu? Tzipora and her sisters, that's right. So correct, very good thing you hear, Esther. The daughters of Yitro said, Madomi harten bo hayom, you came home so quickly today. So they said to their father, an Egyptian man saved us. Moshe was standing there. He didn't say anything, he didn't correct, he didn't say, no, I look like an Egyptian prince, but really I'm a Hebrew. He didn't say it. So the Medrash says, an Egyptian says, you did not say, I am a Hebrew, therefore your bones will not enter the land of Israel. The truth is, this is a Medrash, but he incorporates it into Sefer Hasidim. Now, for those of us in this room to say, Ich bin a Yid, it doesn't come at a high price. For Yehuda Hasid, it could mean life and death. Because if a Jew chooses to disguise himself as a Christian so that he can do business, travel from one city to another, something like that, so that's why he does it. If someone says, are you really a faithful Christian? For him to say, yes, that's the safest thing. For him to say, no, I'm a Jew, it could pay a heavy price for it. But Rabbi Yehuda Hasid said, it's the most profound profanation of God's name to pretend to be or to fail to pretend to be a Christian. Okay. Whether that's halachically binding, I'm not saying that it is, but much of what's in Sefer Hasidim is of this sort of pious exhortation. Here's another excerpt. If a good-hearted person married a convert who is good-hearted, modest, and benevolent, then it is better to marry one of their children than to marry a Jew who does not possess these qualities, because the offspring of the convert will be tzaddikim and good people. So this is quite interesting. To me, it's for a medieval Ashkenazic rabbi to make such a statement, I think is notable. That's why I've got it here. Here's another excerpt. It is written, if not, say so, and I will go to the right or to the left. Who said that? If not, say so, and I will go to the right or to the left. Eved Abraham, that's right, Eved Abraham. Eved Abraham, who we think was called Eliezer, probably was. I mean, Rashi says it was Eliezer. So he was trying to find a wife for Yitzchak, and he said to he found one, Rivka, and the family said, yeah, maybe she's not the right one, maybe, let's say, give it a bit of time. So he said, no, let's ask her, tell me if she's coming, then great. If not, I'm out of here. I'll go to the right. So he says, this verse teaches us that if someone is courting a girl who rejects his advances and does not wish to marry him and tells him so, he should not pursue the matter, but should immediately turn his attention to another prospective match. Now you could say this is sort of obvious, but it gives us a flavor of the diverse nature of this book. I mean, it's a mixture of, sound advice, common sense, dating counsel, and that sort of thing. Okay, here's the last excerpt before we do some of these fascinating examples from the will, tzava. So here's an excerpt from Sefer Hasidim. If you see two people whispering into each other's ear, control your curiosity and don't ask them what secrets they are telling each other, lest you make liars out of them. If they would have wanted you to know, they would have told you. Since obviously they don't wish to share their confidences with you, they will tell you a lie. Again, you might say it's common sense, but it's also a bit of mussar, a bit of sensitivity and as I say, common sense. Okay, these are some examples from the Sefer Hasidim. But now let's consider some of the exhortations or even the instructions included in this ethical will of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. So I've wrote a list for myself, and then there's some that are here printed as well. So do not call to the Torah a father and a son consecutively. It's cited in Shulchan Aruch. It's not cited as a halacha, but it is widely observed. I believe it's universally observed. Miguel, is that true in Sephardi?
Very dramatic.
Ayin hara, that's right. Anything to do with ayin hara, the Sephardim are not going to say, well, the Ashkenazim are concerned about it, but we don't care about ayin hara. Chas v'chalila, just the opposite. So this idea of ayin hara, that to think a certain family is getting all of the kibudim, so to give a father and a son and a father, a brother and a brother, but it's given rise to a whole kind of literature. What about a father and a son-in-law? What about a grandfather and a grandson? What about an uncle? What about a half-brother? What about a step-brother? What about if you don't call him by name, if you call the father, and then the son says, okay, come on, we won't call you by name. Maybe it's okay. What if it's two Sifrei Torah? Actually, that is the halacha. If it's a different Sefer Torah, then you can call like the father for Shvi'i and the son for Maftir, if it's a different Sefer Torah. So all of these details, and they're discussed in great specificity in the halachic literature. He fasted every day. We mentioned, do not close off a window or a door of your home. And again, there's a whole literature about this. Let's say you buy a house, and you want to remodel it, you want to extend it, or it needs, it's dilapidated, it needs a change. So there is a whole literature about he says, Yehuda Chassid says, don't close off a door or a window, don't close it off.
You make holes within
the
my house, I think for apparent
like a drill bit.
To make air between
That's right.
the windows and door.
That's right. That's what they said. All kinds of ideas, like a borehole or something, or different methods. Some say if the windows are next to one another, so you can close off one window if there's another window right next to it. Or some say if it's a door that was never used anyway, then it's okay. But there's a lot of discussion, the whole body of halakhic literature about it. And the reason is because of the shadim. The shadim need to get out. The demons need a place to escape. Yeah? Okay, as removing a mezuzah from one's house, even when you're moving home, you're not allowed to take the mezuzah with you. And this, again, is found in the Gemara, but it's found in Yehuda Chassid as well. And therefore they say, even if all different circumstances, because it's a sakana, it's regarded as a danger to leave the house without mezuzot. Cutting down... So that's the thing. If you're selling it to a goy or something like that, then you're allowed to, because then they're going to maybe mistreat the mezuzah. So there are different scenarios where one is allowed to. But the principle is regarded with great caution because of this. It's found here in the...
Renting, it applies also?
It applies if you're renting as well, yeah. But if you are leaving the home that doesn't belong to you, you're just a tenant, and you don't know who the next tenants will be, so then you can probably take them with you. But if you're in a Jewish area, the landlord is Jewish, and probably the next tenants are going to be Jewish, then you probably would have to leave them. Sometimes maybe you could do a deal with the next tenant or or you could take down your muhudar mezuzot and put up ones which are b'di'evet kosher. You don't have to be muhudar, but to leave it without mezuzah altogether, this is considered something to be avoided, if at all possible. Cutting down a fruit-bearing tree. Now, this is written in the Torah itself. And the Talmud discusses when you are allowed to, when you're not allowed to. Because you are allowed to cut down a fruit-bearing tree if it's, let's say, diseased or if it's old and the fruit that it bears are not substantial. If the value of the wood exceeds the value of the fruit, then you're allowed to. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you don't. You're not allowed to. Because it's sakana. That's true. In the context, it's talking about when you're waging war against an enemy. It's about Tasha. Yeah, that's true. But but he says because that's right, because it's sakana. And some say, well, you know what you can do? You can sell it to a Gentile and let him cut it down. Then the sakana will go to him, or something like that. A different thing. And you say, yeah, but why do we have to be more devout than the Talmud? The answer is it relates to Kabbalistic ideas, and I'm going to read you an interesting passage about that. What do you say, Ronnie?
The Torah is so specific, mentioning fruit-bearing trees. Isn't it part of the wider principle of Bal Tashchit that you should take care of the environment, even if waging war, that you shouldn't destroy
a scorched earth policy against that. That's right. That's right.
Based on that principle.
That's true. But he takes it further. He says even if the fruit-bearing tree is hardly bearing any fruit anymore, he says you're still not allowed to cut it down. It's a sakana. Here's one which I didn't see in any of my historical sources, but in my Mishnah Berurah studies, I came across it. A very interesting little example. It's in Orach Chaim 222. It's easier to remember if you want. The Magen Avraham quotes the Sefer Hassidim. One compelled by the Shulchan Aruch is speaking about the bracha of Shehecheyanu on acquiring something new or joyous occasions. One says Hatova Hametiv, if one enjoys some benefit which is beneficial to others as well as himself or herself, you say Hatova Hametiv. Then the contrast is the blessing Lo Aleinu of Dayan HaEmes, a person who sustains the loss of a close relative, Lo Aleinu, he makes that blessing the truthful judge, Dayan HaEmes. Says the Sefer Hasidim, it's a bit politically incorrect, but he was very politically incorrect, I can tell you. One compelled by poverty to marry a wealthy woman whom he does not actually like should recite two blessings. Hatova HaMeitiv, on marrying a rich woman, and Dayan HaEmes, because he doesn't really want to marry her. That's what he says. That's what he says. And the Magen Avraham quotes him. Magen Avraham is a very important halachic authority. Our time is nearly up, but I do want to just go through with you, some we mentioned already, some of these excerpts from his will and testament. Maybe before we do, I'll just read you a little passage here. The question is, these tzavaos, these things, are they binding on you, on me? Maybe he only meant it for his descendants. Maybe he only meant it for his followers. How do you know it's binding on everyone? Especially, I don't want to pick on her, but Nurida, she comes from good Iraqi origins, or Yedidenu Miguel. I mean, Miguel's forebears, even going back 1,000 years, didn't know Yehuda Hassidim. Why are they bound? When you see, and yet it's a remarkable thing. They have spread throughout the Jewish world in many cases. So you might say, okay, this is like minhag, but is it halachically binding? So the poskim discuss it. And the Noda B'Yehuda was of the view that if you want to follow these opinions or these concerns, you certainly may, but it's not binding. That was the view of the Noda B'Yehuda. However, not everyone agreed with that. I'll just read you a few lines here of Rav Chaim Tzanzer, Divrei Chaim. Michtavo higiyani v'hine lefalpel bezeh b'dvar nisui bas achoso. Can a man marry his niece? So the Torah says, yes, he may. The Talmud seems to say it's praiseworthy. It's praiseworthy to us.
My father married twice. One niece and then second.
Yeah, and second niece, is that right? Really? So Rabbi Yehuda Hassidim says, you're not allowed to marry your niece. That's what Rabbi Yehuda Hassidim says. So the Rabbi Yehuda says, no, so he says, so Chaim Tzanzer says, there's no point in analyzing this and going into the complexities of it. She'ein lanu shum yediyah v'hu midvar hanistarim. These are hidden matters. So he said it's not for us to even analyze it. These are hidden matters. ובחירס כבוד תורס הגאוני באסראי שיכול לפעל פה בכוונת רבי יהודה חסיד וכי נסכים בדבר. Basically he says, why should we try to speculate and to analyze something we know nothing about? He said Rabbi Yehuda Chassid was like on the level of a Tana or a Navi, a prophet. He said, who are we to come after him and say, well, this verse suggests differently, this Mishnah suggests differently, this Talmudic passage suggests differently. We know nothing about these matters. They're much more exalted than us. And he says, the Smag or Zarua, he says, all of our Torah, all of our minhagim in the land of Ashkenaz and Sarfat are based on the disciples of Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, like I mentioned, the Smag, the Or Zarua, Rokeach. And therefore he says, definitely, whatever Rabbi Yehuda Chassid said and wrote and told his Talmidim is more valuable, more compelling, more definitive than our attempts to analyze halachic precedent. And he says, he says, he says, God should forgive him for starting up with Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. It's quite fighting words. Just one other example, which I won't read at length, but it's fascinating. This is the Divrei Chaim, Reb Chaim Tzanzer. I'll just pass it on. I was holding it because I wanted to read that citation. You can take a look at that. And there's one other thing, I won't read it at length because our time is nearly up, but also mentioned in the Nosei Kelim and the Shulchan Aruch is Rabbeinu Ephraim was one of the Balei Tosfos. And he had a certain opinion about a particular fish. And he said this fish is kosher. And then Rabbi Yehuda HaChassid Omar Kol Mish Yochal Burbuta Lo Yizkeh Lachol Livyasan. Whoever eats that fish will not merit to eat from the Leviathan at the end of days. Pam Achas Hitiru Rabbeinu Ephraim. Once Rabbeinu Ephraim caught that fish, or they brought the fish to him, he looked at it and said, yeah, it's a kosher fish. V'amrlo b'chalom shehitir shratzim v'chazer b'av asra. He had a dream. Rabbi Yehuda Chassid came to him a dream, and he said, "You have allowed something which is strictly unkosher," and he recanted. So the Rabbi Yehuda takes that up as well, and he says, "Divrei chalomos lo ma'alin v'lo moridin me'olam lo shamati lo chiach din mibal chalomos hazeh." That we don't paskan halacha according to dreams, and. He said, so he's very much against it, but there were others who were concerned about it. So this is the realm of things which go beyond the halachic system and are really quite beyond that. Okay, we just go through this quickly, then we're done. Don't visit... Yeah, you're right. That's true. Quite right. In terms of the Divrei Chaim and Rabbi Yehuda, absolutely. Okay, we'll just go through these and then we're done. Don't visit the same grave twice on one day. Don't weep excessively for a deceased person. There are 3 days for weeping, 7 days for eulogizing, 30 days for mourning. Beyond that, God says, don't be more merciful than I am. Okay, here you go. Lo Aleinu Jamie is it's more than 30 days, yeah. Just about? Just about 30 days, okay. A person should not marry his deceased wife's sister unless he has small children and she has pity on them. And even though the Gemara says differently, it says that it's praiseworthy, and we said the Rabbi Yehuda says he's allowed to. Don't celebrate the weddings of 2 of your children on the same day. Then to the right of that, you should not designate the same person as Sandek for more than one of your children. I'll tell you the truth. I was aware of this, but I didn't know where it came from. And now I see it comes from this. This is very well known. Don't choose the same person to be the sandek for 2 sons. You know, Baruch Hashem, a person may have multiple sons. You've got to find a different sandek for each one. Don't cut down a fruit-bearing tree, even where the halacha allows it. He says a sakana. Don't write in a book, this book belongs to. Just write your name, omitting this book belongs to. Who's got my Sefer Chassidim? Okay, it's over here. Take a look what... That's right. So the minhag is, and I have to admit, I didn't know why. I was in yeshiva, I started buying Svarim. I saw everybody writes in it, Lamed Hey Vav Lashem Artzum Lo'ah. So I started to do the same. Can I confess, until I prepared for this year, I didn't know why I did it. Now I know why. Rabbi Yehuda Chassid says, don't write in a book, this belongs to Rashi Simon. So what people do is they write, Lashem Ha'aretzum Lo'ah, to God is the world and the fullness of it. And then you say, Birshut Rashi Simon. it's in my under my possession, but it doesn't really belong to me. Really, everything belongs to God. But in the meantime, I'm looking after it. So that's so he said you can write your name, but don't put this book belongs to. So that's what's from Yehuda Chassid. I'll just end by the legend of his death. It was Shabbos, Parsha Zachar in 1217, and he was on his deathbed, and people, the Talmidim and the Gedolim of the town came to see him, came to visit him, and they were talking about halachic matters, about mystical matters, and he said, as he was dying, he said, if I am worthy of the Olam Haba, he said, they won't ring the church bells when I die. Because in his town, in order to go to the cemetery, they had to go out of a certain gate. And the Christians, when they saw they were bringing a corpse out, they would ring the bell like they did for that. That's the minhag of the churches. That's why Ernest Hemingway wrote a book called For Whom the Bell Tolls. I hope you remember that. For whom the bell tolls. So the ringing of the bells is a siman. The Torah anytime doesn't get that too often. For whom the bell tolls. So he said, if I'm Ben al-Haba, and sure enough, when he passed away, they took his coffin out, a stretcher, his remains, and the man who was in charge of ringing the bell, he saw them, so he ran up to the belfry to ring the bell, and it collapsed. And the bell didn't ring, and the gate collapsed, and he died as well. This bell ringer. So this is how people said. You see that even in his life, both in his life and even in his death, he was a wonder worker. So we've learned a bit about Rabbi Yehuda Chassid. He is shrouded in mystery. The historical evidence is, let's say, sketchy, but definitely his impact is profound, and even in ways which to this day I don't understand, and the poskim don't really understand, and yet many of his observances have become part of Jewish life and practice even to this day. Thank you very much.